Good afternoon. I'm Peggy Wolf, chair of this year's Great Decisions Committee. I'm delighted to be here Zooming with you again, and I'm grateful that the library has that option. So thank you to the library and the tech department, and a special thank you to Tara Farrell, liaison with the library. The 2022 committee members are Brenda Bradshaw, who is our contact with the program, Norman Bryant, Chris Cole, Donna Hart, and Diane Pennington. If you are joining us today, you may already be a member of a Great Decisions discussion group, or you may be curious about Great Decisions and want to learn how you can participate. So what is Great Decisions? Great Decisions is a discussion program produced by the Foreign Policy Association, a nonprofit organization established in 1918. It is the largest education program on U.S. foreign policy and global affairs. Great Decisions has been sponsored in the Tulsa area by Friends of the Tulsa City County Library for nearly 50 years. Groups meet throughout the area, led by volunteer group coordinators. The Foreign Policy Association produces an annual briefing book of global policy issues to accompany the discussion. The 2022 discussion topics include outer space, climate change, Russia and the US, Myanmar and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Quad Alliance, which consists of the US, India, Japan, and Australia, drug policy in Latin America, industrial policy, Biden's agenda, and changing demographics. If you are looking to join a group, we have 7 groups in the Tulsa area. We will put a slide to the complete list of meeting groups and contact information in the chat. Groups begin meeting now through February. You will note that 4 of the groups are presently closed to new members, mainly because of COVID. However, these groups may open depending on COVID status. When you join a group, coordinators will have briefing books available for you to purchase. You can also purchase a book for $28 directly from the Friends of the Tulsa City County Library. Email friends@tulsalibrary.org. We hope you will consider joining a group. However, you do not have to be a member of a group to order a book. I would like to recognize the group leaders who have had to deal with difficult decisions for the past 2 years. Matt Vanderlip, Norman Bryant, Jeff Allred, Irene M. Brown, Jane Ho, Jan Slater, Janet Holland, and Catherine Nielsen. Thank you for your continuing leadership. The Friends of the Tulsa City County Library sponsor Great Decisions. You may find more information about the Friends in the chat or by going to the library's website. There you will see a list of all the activities the group sponsors. I encourage your participation. And now for our speaker today. If I took the time to tell you all the professional background of Dr. Fisher, we would never have time to get to his presentation. So just let me tell you briefly that he has a BS in geology and geophysics from Yale University and an MS and PhD from Case Western Reserve University. He has worked in research and taught in Manchester, New Hampshire, Cleveland, Ohio, and Santa Barbara, California. He then moved to Tulsa and worked in research at Amoco and other companies before starting his own company. Dr. Fisher's many areas of expertise include environmental litigation, environmental issues arising from land disposal of waste from confined animal feeding, environmental issues from waste generated by petroleum and other industries, and studies of the fate and transport of organic and non-organic contaminants in soils, sediments, and waters. He has written numerous peer-reviewed articles and given expert testimony in federal and state courts, as well as administrative hearings. Please place your questions in the chat, and Dr. Fisher will respond to as many as we have time for. I'm honored to present our speaker today, Dr. Bert Fisher. Dr. Fisher?
Well, thank you, Peggy. Thank you very much. Certainly would like to give my great thanks to the committee, and in particular to Brenda Bradshaw, who first thought that maybe I should give this talk. I also want to thank my wife, Laura, because she's put up with me thinking about this for the last couple of months. It's a really long title, which I won't bore you with, but what this talk is going to tell you is that it's getting hot, and we kind of all know that. And we did it. We need to do something about it, and at least one of the great threads in the rope of something about it we're going to take a look at, and that's electric vehicles. And we're going to discover that it probably is not as easy a trip forward as we would have hoped. But then the message of hope, we can do this or die trying. So with that, I'm going to proceed. Okay, we all know it's getting hot. You know, Ethel Waters in 1933 sang Irving Berlin's song, "The temperature's the heat wave." The temperature's rising. It's not surprising. So everybody's seeing a graph that looked like this. Temperature's going up. But in researching this talk, I found a particularly disturbing video produced by NASA, which is looking at global temperature anomalies between 1880 and the present. Blue is cooler than average on a 5-year basis, and red is hot. And here goes the video. You can draw your own conclusions as it comes toward the present. So you'll see the warming that we're seeing is global, and it's happening faster. So when I was in graduate school way long ago, this wasn't any secret that the temperature is rising, and we pretty much knew why. But it takes a long time for human societies to recognize some things. But now we see changes that are easy to see and are really disturbing. On the top graph, there's the continental ice sheet in Antarctica in blue, and the ice sheet in Greenland in appropriately green, and they're going down. That is, we're losing mass in the ice sheets, and the bottom graph shows a rise in sea level. So when we melt ice on land, sea level goes up. And we've all heard about that, because when sea level goes up, coastal areas and low-lying islands are threatened. Okay. And we're here because carbon dioxide is kind of the marquee gas everybody talks about, but there are many others. We're here because the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing. And this is data that's been collected more or less continuously at multiple locations around the globe since the late 1950s. And really, first, we're here because what we did is we got richer. We got richer by substituting the stored chemical energy in food into human muscle power and animal muscle power, with some contributions from renewables, wind and water. We had this circumstance, but now we had this one. And, you know, here's a advertisement for an air conditioner. It looks pretty great. Then we have a car, and everybody seems happy now that we're burning things to make energy and make our lives better. And indeed, our lives did get better. But what we fail to recognize is that there's a huge infrastructure of power generation and the generation of fossil fuels behind all this, and that the facade has created some what we think now as difficult conditions. And really, we're here because of this. There are a lot of people in the world. We're pushing 8 billion now, something like that. And everyone in that photograph on one side of your screen would also like a car and an air conditioner. So global appetite for carbon has increased as well. We're accelerating for that reason. Okay, but really, we're here because energy equals money. Here's a plot in which we have energy use in whatever units on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is GDP per capita in 2011 US dollars. And we are here, United States. We're sort of leading the pack. And what it's saying is that the more energy you use, and it makes sense, we substitute that for other kinds of muscle power, for example. The more energy we can use in a shorter period of time, the richer we get. And in fact, money, to quote Cindy Lauper, changes everything. Okay, well, here's something that's really interesting. We've changed so much, in fact. Human energy generation since 1950 exceeds that across all prior times by factors of thousands. And we, in fact, have transformed the world. And so welcome to the Anthropocene, which, by the way, will be followed in some books and some ideas by the we should have seen. That's a joke, folks. But here's the deal from Pogo back in 1971. Walt Kelly figured out, yep, son, we have met the enemy and he is us. And that's true. It is us. Oops. Okay, so we've really figured out the cause and effect. The cause is that when we pump up the amount of infrared absorbing gases, the so-called greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere, the temperature goes up, and there are multiple scenarios. It's clearly not a simple linear problem, but we know the solution is we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the dirty little secret is if you really need to reach climate goals, you'll also need to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. That's a much taller challenge and not today's talk. Okay, so this really should be simple. We know kind of what to do, and so now we're going to do it. But wait, more than 80% of all energy on the globe comes from fossil fuels today. So despite the talk that you often hear, we sort of have the notion that we'll transform ourselves into a renewable energy economy and just go on down the road. This is unlikely to happen in a really short period of time, in my opinion, even with massive economic upheaval. So that's an issue. But to attack a big problem, I don't think that it makes any sense to sit back and say, well, it's just too big. I think we'll die now. We need to work together to push this. So we need to understand the sources of our problem, understand what the problem is, and then apply our resources carefully because they are limited. So if we look at that, these are energy emissions from various parts of energy sector. And you'll note the United States is on one side of your screen, and the global emissions, which includes the US, is on the other side. And the thing to note is that we have a different mix of important CO2 sources, and in particular, one of the really big shares of CO2 source in the United States is from transportation. And really, that's primarily the emissions from gasoline and diesel combustion. So There you go. So the best plan for the U.S. and the other piece is energy production of electricity. So for the U.S., we want to decarbonize the transport and decarbonize electricity. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, you know, eat me and drink me, and everything will be okay. Although in this case, one won't get bigger without and the other one won't make you smaller. Okay, so it's a big issue. There are an awful lot of moving parts, and I want to focus on one piece of that, on electric vehicles. Certainly, if we want to decarbonize transportation, that will also involve electrical generation issues, but I'm not going to look at that in any detail. But we're going to have to change over to electric vehicles. Now, and we're going to do this, at least the projections suggest this is going to be really, really fast, that we will grow this really fast. So we have more than a 10-fold production change is anticipated over current production by about 2040. Okay, but new paradigms require new materials. And although these two drawings seem to represent very similar circumstances, and they do, in both cases, cars are picking up new energy source. In one case, it's gasoline, and in the other case, they're being recharged. You'll note these people look very futuristic in that one. They're all dressed in white with have black jackets. But in new vehicles, electric vehicles are going to have some new characteristics. They're going to be lightweight. They're going to have very high capacity batteries. They're going to have electric motors. They're not going to have any exhaust, and they won't be carrying any fuel. So they're going to be different from the vehicles we are familiar with. And they're going to need a new suite of materials. Lightweight cars are going to need a lot more aluminum. Bodies will be aluminum, and there'll be carbon composites. They're going to need a charging infrastructure. They're going to need batteries, and they'll need magnets for the electrical motors. And each one of those requirements is going to be accompanied by an increase in the need for materials. And so today, what I'm going to focus on are the battery-related and the motor-related materials. That is lithium, cobalt for batteries, and rare earths, which actually aren't so rare, but they're very important in making strong magnets. So our demand for batteries is projected to increase by a lot, by more than a factor of 3 over the next 5 years. And this is the looking at factories that we either are committed to being produced or are being built now. So this is going to happen. The thing that you don't learn directly from this is that batteries, most of these batteries will be produced in China, and most of those will be for their domestic market and may not be usable in a US market legally for cars. So tier 1 batteries we could use anywhere in the world will only be about 30% of this 2,492 gigawatt hours of storage. Okay, so it's smaller than you think. As our production, the planned production increase the next few years. Now, let's take a look at this because if you have electric cars, you're going to need to use electricity from somewhere, from our electrical generation system, no doubt, to charge those batteries. So here in the green bar, this is current electricity use as measured by direct sales. It's not what we can produce, much more can be produced, but this is the amount of electricity that was sold in the United States in 2020. And this, the Energy Information Administration. And on the right-hand side is there are some efficiency adjustments you need to make this work, because electric motors are far more efficient than gasoline engines and diesel. But I have made those computations, and what it says is that if I replaced the year's worth of fuel expended in the United States with battery capacity for that. I would need something on the order of 70% more direct electrical sales than we currently experience. We'd sell 70% more electricity. There are a lot of studies about this, and we're not going to have to build 70% more power, but we're going to have to sell more, which means we need to transmit more. And it's a big number. So then the other piece is there's a lot to do, and we hope in a short time. But if we took a look at the 2025 global tier 1 lithium ion battery capacity, that is the batteries we could use anywhere in the world to make cars, at the production rate globally for 2025 for those batteries, it would take something on the order of 11 years to produce enough batteries to replace the amount of energy consumed in a single day from the combustion of diesel fuel and gasoline in internal combustion engines. And this is converted for the efficiency differences. So there's a long way to go. We got to build a lot of batteries just to replace the amount of energy we're expending today. And of course, we would anticipate total energy expenditure would go up for transportation. Now let's look at the material issue. This is the parable of Mother Hubbard, who looked in her cupboard to find her poor doggy a bone, and there wasn't any. So this notion of critical versus strategic, the joke is it's critical if you need it, and strategic means you don't have it. Now, if we take a look at electric vehicles, and down the left-hand side of this chart are various kinds of technologies that we would anticipate becoming more important in a green energy economy. And we look along the top, there are a number of materials that would be required to do that. And electric vehicles with battery storage need more critical and or strategic materials than any other element of the new energy economy. And they need a lot. This is if you went to current production of vehicles in the US and you replace them with battery powered materials, we would need 30 times more lithium, 20 times more cobalt, huge amount of rare earth elements. By the way, for those of you who are in the investment community, platinum group metals, things that are used in catalysts to get rid of exhaust gas contaminants, are going to have a decrease in demand. Okay. Well, these materials aren't uncommon in the crust. There are lots of goofy looking periodic table pictures published. This one has to do with, was really for cell phones, was kind of almost related to our topic. But the materials we need in red, lithium, this sort of ochre color is around some of the rare earth elements, in blue around cobalt. These are not really in limited supply in the sense that they're relatively abundant in the crust. Lithium is about twice as abundant as lead. Cobalt is about 3 times more abundant than lead. And rare earth elements vary in abundance, but they are not rare. They are not terribly rare in terms of the whole crust. But of course, looking at this talk in the viewpoint of from the US to the rest of the world, and with respect to us, it may be more problematic. So some of the questions that I say to ask, that I asked myself and tried to answer about these critical and strategic materials were, where do they come from? That's a geology question. 2, who owns the resource? Who controls it? Which is a commercial and political question. Who controls process? What is the capacity to produce? And what about temporal aspects of supply and demand? If we speed production ramp up, can we actually, and the demand rises, can we actually meet that? And we're seeing some of those sort of economic effects in our current economy. I won't go through this slide in great detail, but it just tells you that when people talk about natural materials, it can be pretty confusing because the total resource is all we have. that doesn't mean that you can extract it. You get down to the reserve base here is about, you can in fact extract that and you know about it. But some is speculative, some we think may be there, and some we know is there, but we can't mine it. So these can be problematic when people throw those terms around, and sometimes you see tabulations that are hard to understand. That's because whoever put them together either didn't understand those terms, or they in fact wished not to understand those terms. But anyway, I thought I'd look at this global occurrence of lithium. Well, lithium occurs in really two forms. One is as residual salts and brines, and two would be in a mineral that's present in many granites. It's called spodumene. It's also present in metamorphic rocks. It's a lithium-rich type of aluminosilicate. It's not important what it is. It's just that we have two different kinds. We have some that are easy to mine and get out in brines, and some that are a little tougher to process in hard mineral resources. But if we take a look where lithium reserves are, what the big point to note here is they're primarily in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, in this very, very dry region in northern Chile, and just near northern Chile, and Australia. China has some, but these I think actually were identified as resources. It's the closest I could get to a reserve. But that being said, if we rank them by where they exist, what we discover is we are a loser. We do not have much in the way of known lithium reserves in the United States. Secondly, if we look at refining and mining, we do have a big chunk, the US has a big chunk of the lithium business. Albemarle and Livent have some businesses there. And interestingly, both of those companies have brine extraction wells in western Arkansas, where brines that came from the Smacko have been known for years to contain substantial levels of lithium, but they aren't a huge, at least known reserve. Okay, so if you look at that, where is everything? It's in Australia or Chile, or China for that matter, but not so much in China. Okay, let's look at cobalt occurrence. And cobalt, here and shown in blue, these are known occurrences, again, has a global occurrence. It tends to be associated with mafic rocks, deeper rocks in the crust, or things that came from them. And the thing to note is this really dark blue spot here is the Congo, which is a big chunk of, it is the massive chunk of cobalt, which we'll talk about. An interesting place here, New Caledonia, and if you look at New Caledonia, the main island, on Google Earth, you'll note some of the issues with mining. There are numerous open pit mines there that are easy to spot from space. Okay. The other piece on cobalt, and place the Russians are putting their interest in, is in deep ocean mining. These occur in manganese, so-called manganese nodules that exist on the floor of the ocean. There's quite a bit of controversy over mining those because it's believed it would be fairly destructive of an ecosystem of which we know little. Okay, here are the global reserves, mainly in Congo and Australia. Let's rank them. Here's Congo, is virtually everything. Australia is number 2. Everybody else is running a very distant race. And we're again losers in the cobalt reserve race. We're a really small player. Okay, so the other piece is you need to look at is who controls this. If we take a look at that, we discover is, and with respect to where things are, mining, it's almost all in the Congo. But if you look at processing, nearly all, or way more than half of the, move something here, half is refining is done in China. So although cobalt may be sourced in the Congo, it's largely refined in China. Okay, so And oh, I didn't mention this, 15 of the 19 cobalt producing mines in Congo are owned or financed by Chinese companies. That's a interesting thing. There's a theme here. If we take a look at rare earth elements, there certainly is a global distribution of them as well. So it's not surprising that all these materials have global distributions. When we have the dots there, it just means those may be areas of somewhat higher concentration or a mine or places known. It's there. It turns out that most of the reserves are in China. So China actually really dominates the world market in rare earth elements. And we, again, are really trailing the pack. We lack those resources. Now, refining and mining, this is a win for the home team. More than half of mining extraction is done in China. The other big chunks done in Australia. We do mine and extract quite a bit here, but nearly all refining is done in China. And rather inexplicably, Estonia is the #3 refining nation in the world, for what that's worth. Okay, so here's the big picture. If we look at lithium resources, they're dominantly in terms of production. They're dominantly in Argentina and Australia at this time. If we look at cobalt, it is overwhelmingly in the Congo. And if we look at the production of rare earth elements, they're overwhelmingly present and produced in China. And we are here in the one part of the white space there, in which none of these we're in a leadership role. Okay, so where we are. With current technology, electrification of transportation, we're going to require really substantial quantities of lithium, cobalt, and at least some rare earth elements. The supply of these elements is largely controlled at present by China. They control mines for rare earth elements and cobalt. They control the location of the resource with respect to rare earth elements, and they control processing for all three of these. U.S. reserves are small, U.S. demand is high, and the United States is only one player in the global picture. Okay, so our supply of these materials, indicated here, red lithium, blue cobalt, and the ochre color for rare earth elements, is limited, it's disruptible, and it's vulnerable. So let's look at some vulnerabilities. Production and concentration takes place in very few countries. There's a lot of political risk here, certainly geopolitical risk, because it could be possible export restrictions. Recently, the new president of Chile made some speeches concerning wishing to potentially nationalize the lithium industry. And in the past, there has been, the Chilean government has restricted export of lithium. So, we can't control what other governments might do. And so we have geopolitical risk. And there's political risk. There's going to be a tremendous amount of money involved here. And in this case, Hunter Biden has been in the news for a number of reasons, and among them, it has to do with trying to help the Chinese secure cobalt. So you sort of wonder about some of these things. But the point is that people are going to be engaged in controlling these resources. And so not only we have international disruptions, but we could have national political consequences from those activities. Okay, and environmental challenges will be many. There'll be some significant land use changes. Mining is really destructive for the landscape. We're going to have water, soil, and air pollution from mining and processing. And in some places, there could be strong competition for limited water resources. Okay. So here's a processing facility in China for rare earth elements. Half a century of mining has caused a lot of problems. This is a New York Times Yale Environmental 360 article. So in our run to produce more and produce them quickly, there will be casualties. there will likely be, and we can't control, have environmental controls everywhere. So we're unlikely to have a pristine development of these resources. There are going to be a lot of social challenges as well. Certainly, the Congo is a good poster child for this. There are some poster children in that picture. But corruption and misuse of government resources can be rife. There's a lot of money. Governmental entities control the mineral rights in many places. We worry about community equity because the mines aren't everywhere. The mines are in certain places, and people living near there are going to bear a greater burden from the miners. Worker safety, again, safety in the environment among the first casualties in a global chase after resource. Certainly human rights abuses. There's been reports of slave labor used in Congo. I'm familiar with any slave labor in China, but with rare earth elements, and certainly child labor. So this young man here is a budding miner. Okay, and community equity and the internal political strife it will cause. This is has to do with the Thacker Pass proposed lithium mine in Nevada, which is opposed by Native peoples because the mine will be developed on property that has cultural significance to these tribal members. So, we need the lithium. What do we do? How do we assure that everyone's rights are protected? That's an issue. And there certainly will be economic challenges. The concept of greenflation. Mineral projects have really long lead times. And by the way, they require enormous investment of capital. But we're faced with a very rapid increase in demand. And there's very likely to be a timing mismatch between supply and demand. And that will lead to a materials crunch. So these materials are in fact traded on the world market. Lithium is traded as lithium carbonate. And you'll note, here's an interesting thing where it says CNY. That means it's traded in Chinese currency. That's how it's valued. It's not valued in US dollars. It's valued in yuan. But here, what's going on is we've had a massive, almost a 5.5 times price increase in lithium carbonate from last year at this time, with most of that increase having taken place since about August of last year. And a similar but less dramatic price increases have happened with respect to cobalt, which has gone up about 50% in price. So we have a demand push inflation drive that we're likely to see if you really ramp up production quickly to produce electric vehicles. And of course, there's always the world needs a reliable and stable mineral supply. So we need a stable international trade and investment regime, really key to this. The rule of law is key to this. Multilateral policy support is key to this. International coordination is essential. And, unfortunately, as a student of history, none of those look like they're easily captured, even in the face of crisis. So at about this point in developing my ideas, I found this picture and I thought it really embodied how I felt. Can't we just change the channel? And the answer is, sorry, we can't move forward. We can move forward, but we cannot go backward. Lewis Carroll writes of Alice, I can't go back to yesterday because I was a different person then. We were a different place during the hydrocarbon age. And as that age attenuates, we're going to become a different society again, at least with respect to the technologies that we employ. So we can't go back. We've got to find a way forward. But I would anticipate an extremely rough road ahead, that we should anticipate turmoil and disruption. And those will be social, political, economic. And when you go to purchase a car or you find that you can't get one because they're out of stock right now, personal in many ways, and source financially, personally disruptive. Okay. So I wrote this, and then I discovered that many of these were very similar to President Biden's goals, or at least as expressed, where we needed to do things. I added a couple. One, we really need to secure access to raw and refined materials. That's absolutely key. And one thing that will be important there is to explore for these materials domestically. It's not true that the entirety of the crust of the United States, both its contiguous states as well as Alaska, have been fully explored for their mineral wealth. And so that will be important to attempt to develop domestic supplies as possible. I think also it's going to be important to find alternative technologies and materials for commercial and defense applications. I don't think we can continue on in a world where we are dependent upon potential adversaries for some of these critical materials. So there may be alternative technologies we've yet to explore. It's going to be important to support and stimulate relevant U.S. materials processing and manufacturing sectors. And you're seeing that now. I mean, the drive toward electric vehicles is real. The EPA 55 mile per gallon fleet mileage standard, there's only one way to meet that, and that's with electric vehicles. That's coming. And certainly there's been a tremendous investment in building batteries here in the United States. So we need to just be supporting that. It's also going to be important to develop end-of-life reuse and critical materials recycling at scale. Cars are going to be really valuable when they're junked now, because we'll need to extract all those materials from the car and put it back into production. To the extent possible, it's going to be important to do that. It has to be economic, and it has to be done at scale. So a couple of goals I'm thinking about. One is, one reason we have all these cars is that we have a huge demand for individual transport. Certainly, I like my individual transport. And the other thing we're really dependent upon in the United States, different from some places, is we're really dependent upon transport by large trucks. So rubber-tired transport is a most flexible way to move goods from staging or terminaling areas to end users. It's also pretty inefficient with respect to resource. So we need to be thinking about how to be more efficient, how to find the materials we need, see if we can improve processes and technologies so that we don't need all these materials in the amounts that we currently need them, or at all. And we need to be recycling these materials from the end use devices. And with that, I will open the floor to questions, and then I'll just open up with mine. Will a pact with Satan be required? The answer is possibly, and we may not love ourselves in the morning, but we'll probably do it anyway. With that, I'll turn it over to the questions.
I do have a lot of questions. Thank you very much. I can't say I'm optimistic, but I'm going to get there. I'm going to go backwards because some of the early questions I think you've already answered, but I am going to ask those in case you want to add something. So the most recent question is, do you have any feel for what Ford, GM, et cetera, are actively doing to procure lithium, cobalt, and rare earths?
I don't know what Ford and GM are doing. I do know, at least know in the sense of having read articles in the Wall Street Journal, and New York Times, and The Economist, that Tesla did a very clever thing. They vertically integrated. They took a play out of Henry Ford's playbook. Ford had things from rubber plantations in South America to iron ore mines in Minnesota that all fed down to his plants. And Tesla is doing that with some of these critical materials, in particular lithium, from mining to battery production.
And another question, you mentioned 11 years to mine enough lithium to replace one day of fossil fuel consumption. Is there supply to do away completely with combustion vehicles? Is lithium recyclable indefinitely?
Okay, in court, I would say that's a compound question. I'm going to answer them in order. One, just to get over any misapprehension, that notion of what it takes to replace it is not the amount of lithium. That has to do with the production of batteries. So we certainly, I think there is enough lithium available to make the number of batteries that we need. What was the second part of that question, Peggy?
Is lithium recyclable indefinitely?
Yes, lithium is an element. We can't transmute it by normal chemical means. It's, we can extract it from things pretty easily. It's soluble in water. So recycling lithium is probably one of the easier things to do from batteries.
You mentioned that China's batteries will be for domestic consumption. Basically.
Well, I said that, yeah, what I hope to have said is that the largest piece of production is in China. And it turns out only a small piece of the Chinese production of batteries in 2025 will be tier 1 batteries. That is, batteries that could be sold in the United States or Europe for use in cars. The Chinese have most of the battery production, and they have their batteries would not have to meet, for internal consumption, would not have to meet US standards. If you recall, we had things like the hoverboards. The early hoverboards would tend to, some of them would blow up. Those would be lower than tier 1 type batteries.
So a little more explanation. The batteries that China makes would not be acceptable in the rest of the world. They're not going to sell them to the rest of the world.
Oh, Peggy, not all of the batteries. It's just that most of the batteries they're going to make will be for their own internal use in electric vehicles, and they won't need to meet global standards. They will produce some batteries to meet global standards. But remember, the Chinese face an enormous industrial and automotive pollution problem in China, and they are definitely fixated on replacing hydrocarbon fueled vehicles with battery powered vehicles. So they aren't going to be, as well, put it this way, picky about the performance characteristics of the battery.
Thank you. That makes sense. How does this impact the airline industry? What kind of future?
Well, that actually is one of my pet peeves. Airlines are an obvious easy target when people say, gee, you have a huge carbon footprint, you fly everywhere. However, if you look at fuel consumption for jet fuel, it is a vanishingly small proportion of total hydrocarbon fuels. So the airlines are over pilloried by individuals who would like to reduce CO2 consumption. Don't worry about airplanes, worry about cars and trucks. But they will be impacted by this. The other point is that jet fuels are because there's a relatively small volume of material required, probably can be converted to a biofuel base. But it's going to be very hard to make battery powered heavy aircraft in that battery energy density, that the energy density of gasoline is phenomenal. In a gallon of gasoline, there's something like 35 kilowatt hours of total energy. It takes a battery, the battery for my daughter's boyfriend's Tesla Model 3 contains 80 kilowatt hours. So think about that. The problem with gasoline engines, they're only about 33% efficient at best. So you need to burn a lot more gasoline to go the same distance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of another question, would not global cooperation be another thing to do to survive and thrive?
Yes, global cooperation would be a wonderful thing to do to survive and thrive. I've not seen a lot of kumbaya singing recently or ever. I think that there will be important strategic alliances that will be made to help solve this issue. But remember, there's power and money involved here, neither of which is generally conducive to a lot of cooperation.
Should we be paying more attention to hydrogen-powered vehicles, given the lack of access control for lithium and cobalt?
Okay, hydrogen is the fuel of the future, and the joke is it always will be. I don't dismiss that. Hydrogen has a lot of potential as a fuel for aircraft, potentially. You still need energy to put in place to make the hydrogen. It is a great way to store excess electrical generation from, say, wind and solar. But we could certainly look at hydrogen-based cars, and the issue handling hydrogen, though, is fairly complicated. So that might be the second generation. Is you start out with electric vehicles because we have the technology to do all this and can more easily do it. And down the road, there's the hydrogen car. But we've known about hydrogen as a fuel for a long time, and it's not been successfully made into a car in production. So I think that's something that would be for engineering research, but not anything that we can pull off the shelf to help us in the next decade.
Another question is, more EVs in the US means more electric demand. How will electric production be fueled in the future?
Well, there you go. I have a feeling that two things we're going to see. One is we'll see a continuing trend. It'll be evolutionary. We'll see a continuing transition to natural gas as a fuel, because despite the fact that it's still a fossil fuel, it's tremendously decarbonized compared to coal, and in fact is responsible. The conversion to natural gas is responsible for most of the diminution in U.S. CO2 emissions. So we'll see that happening, and then we'll see more wind and more solar, certainly. But I also imagine, despite the strong political opposition it's likely to face, I think we're going to find more nuclear, and it may come in a different form. It may be far more distributed, as Bill Gates seems to envision. But it's a little hard to, it's very hard to imagine a future with growing electrical demand that's growing rapidly without nuclear. I'm not saying I'm a great proponent. We have two words that generally stop nuclear. One is Chernobyl in the recent past, and the other three words, 3 Mile Island. So everybody remembers those.
Right, that's true. You mentioned this earlier, but I want to give you a chance maybe to add something. The question is the mining of these resources going to be as damaging to the earth as fossil fuel mining has been?
Well, that is an interesting question. I think that it has to do with how you view damage. If you view damage, the fossil fuel mining and its combustion and its distributed impact on heat retention on Earth certainly is damaging, and globally so. The actual extraction facilities for oil and gas are very locally damaging, but frequently, I do a lot of work in the oil and gas fields. They really are not, they don't look at all like mines. Mines are highly localized scars. So I don't know if you can, and they really can destroy water resources pretty profoundly, and cause localized impacts. So any sort of resource extraction is damaging. I'm not sure I can put a price on, or some sort of comparison between climate change, which clearly is damaging, or mines which are locally damaging. There's no free lunch. I think in all, if mining is taking place somewhere else, you probably don't care that much about it. But if you drive up to Ottawa County here in Oklahoma, and I encourage you to drive through what is now the Tar, or still is, the Tar Creek Superfund site, you can see the disadvantages of mining.
When you make things personal, it impacts you more, doesn't it?
Right. Well, I guess I didn't really answer the question. Is I don't think no matter what we do, it's going to cost us something.
Well, I think your slides with the little children there mining, that struck me. I mean, how do you put that in finances? How do you talk about damage with that when you see that?
But you don't. I mean, that's part of the picture, is that transitioning to an electric vehicle based transportation system globally is going to have impacts worldwide. We're not the same culture as in the Congo. We don't have the same government as in the Congo. There's some tremendous articles in the New York Times about cobalt production in the Congo, and it's transitioning, but there's a lot of artisanal mining. I don't know the circumstances of that photograph, but it's certainly suggested and stated in the article that child labor is an issue. It's not that child labor will be employed everywhere. It's just that when you make a choice to make a change, it's the choice, the devil you know or the devil you don't. There's no free lunch.
Well, that brings up another question. Do you think the resistance to making progress on climate change is intentional, based on finances, or based on ignorance of the policymakers who don't want to take these steps?
Okay, so when you talk about policymakers, I think we need to talk about policymakers where, and the answer to your question is yes. I mean, just look at the public statements that come out from the most recent climate conference. I mean, I'm no expert, so I'm with you reading the paper about this. But it would appear, I mean, the reason, if you remember, money changes everything. Energy consumption is one of the largest pieces of any enterprise's economy. And so when we ask to change what we do with energy, we're going to make a big change. So some oxes will get gored. And so typically in any sort of human endeavor, the folks currently in charge of big chunks of the economy would like to protect that big chunk of the economy. So I'm not sure it's money and power that we're dealing with. And it's a little harder if people were dropping like flies because it was too hot, then we have too many storms, and was really that linkage was realized. I think you'd see some changes in approach, but still the cause and effect issue is really more of an intellectual construct than something that most folks can get their arms around.
Thank you. There's one more question that you kind of answered, but I want to ask it again to make sure the audience hears your answer. The question is, can't we all just drive less or lower speed limits or put a cap on cars and roads? Or is it too late?
Well, we could. Historically, we have not.
Right.
And I doubt that in the future we will. I mean, in certain circumstances, in urban settings, we certainly have the ability to build better public transit systems that are really easy to use. And in Singapore, the government has a goal of no citizen will be more than a 10-minute walk away from a subway station soon, like by 2030, or maybe before. And when I was in Singapore a few years ago, it was a tremendous place to get around it, and so easy. You didn't need a car. And they sort of dissuaded you from having one. I think it was like $70,000 or something to have a permit to have a car. Good for 5 years, by the way. So I think driving less would be a desirable goal, but we need to have the structures in place so that that's possible.
And I don't see anything happening locally or nationally toward that end. Some talk about trains, but that's all I hear. I don't see anything happening.
No, I mean, that's a policy decision. Better rail transport in the United States would make a lot of sense. High-speed rail would make a lot of sense. But, you know, to do that, there need to be some financial incentives to do that. And we currently, I mean, high-speed rail could replace an awful lot of air transport. So we haven't done that yet. You know, the pain has not been great enough.
Yeah.
Things don't happen because they should.
I can't thank you enough. My particular Great Decisions group has had this conversation countless times without a lot of information that you've given us today. So this will help. Next time we bring this up, a few of us may have some facts to deal with. So I thank you. I thank the committee. I thank everyone who joined us. If you have any questions about Great Decisions, please reach out to friends@tulsalibrary.org. The recording of today's presentation will be on Tulsa City County Library's YouTube page. Just go to youtube.com/Tulsa Library. Thank you to you all. Thank you especially to Dr. Fisher. I really appreciate you being here, and have a good, lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.